And I'm glad you're here. Have a seat. For week 6, UO6D2 is on virtual teams. And in October of 2011, I did a conference presentation. It was in Traverse City, Michigan, for the Michigan Society for Human Resource Management. And the my presentation was on virtual team communications, uh, and so that's what I want to talk about. The A beacon to success: managing virtual team communications. The beacon to success was the conference theme, so that's why that was in there. Number one, virtual teams rely heavily on written communications, which are subject to interpretation, and subtle differences in wording can imply acceptance or rejection. In other words, people are reading interpretation into this, so being aware can make a difference. Uh, a definition of virtual teams: a team that has widely dispersed members working together towards a common goal and linked through computers and other technology. That comes from Landy and Conti work in the 21st century. It's an introduction to industrial and organizational psychology. There's different types of virtual teams. There's different geographic locations within the same country, um, different geographic locations globally, so both are common today. Networked virtual teams where employees are from different companies, so it's like a blended workforce. There's virtual business teams within a company, and there's virtual educational teams um, in schools such as Capella, for example. Types of technology: this is Johansson's time place grid model. As you can see, it comes from the book Leading Business Teams. And it talks about being at, at the same place at the same time. So having face-to-face conversation or meetings, or being at the same place but different times, so like activity logs, preventive maintenance software. Those are common in organizations, or where they communicate between shifts. Then being at a different place at the same time. So these are real-time meetings such as Skype, go-to meetings, which I like to use. And then different places, different times, such as we use in our discussion forums. So all of these take place in the virtual environment. Challenges for virtual teams: certainly personality and cultural differences are challenges. Common language can be. I once mediated a conflict between Japanese and American employees in a company. That language turned out to be the problem. Japanese were using English as a second language, and that presented problems for them. Written communications, dependence on interpretation of written communication. Building and sustaining cohesive teams can be a problem. A problem feeling connected to the organization, or the problem would be a lack of feeling connected. And conflict resolution. We talked about in Chapter 5 Mary Rose theory on micro inequities. So these are the small events, often hard to prove, and often unintentional, yet nonetheless are divisive. And so some examples: I've done a little bit of research with students on this, and the most common example, everyday life, is being left out of a social event. Um, my wife has a friend whose son was getting married, and hearing different people being left out of certain events related to that wedding reminded me of this theory. Example at work, the most frequent comment was being left out of an email. And I might say oftentimes that's unintentional, but nonetheless it has the same effect. More examples, the manager did not acknowledge me personally. Nobody responded to my email. Or I did not get credit for contributions I made. That's a big one. I was not selected to participate. There was different wording in the email compared to mine. A lack of checking in to electronic forms. These are all examples people have given. Micro affirmations are also important. Same thing, small acts, often hard to see, can be unintentional again, but they do just the opposite. They embrace a person. And so these matter, especially, I think they're amplified in the virtual environment. All right, so what were some examples that people told me? I was included in a celebration meeting after work, like an informal celebration. I was acknowledged in a newsletter. There was their name. They were given credit. They received verbal or written recognition for a good job. They received a personal communication follow-up, recognized by name. Were all good examples. Ralph Kilman, he's a co-author of the Conflict Modes instrument, which identifies 5 conflict styles. And Kilman has been doing research over the last 10 years, and he has noticed a much higher rate of incidence of what's work environments categorized as high stress. And he says that under high stress, that the competing conflict style turns to fighting, the avoiding turns to flight, and accommodating turns to freeze, and the rational styles, compromising and collaborating, go away. So under high stress, the potential for micro inequities increase, and not only micro inequities, but just straight out conflict. And so that's worth noticing. By the way, I might say, if I can go back here for a second, I might say, what's the remedy? The remedy here is to become familiar with your indicators of high stress. And so when you realize you're under high stress, you need to have a technique or a strategy for getting back to normal, because when you do that, it restores compromising and collaborating, where you can be effective again. Some interventions that I recommend for virtual teams based upon my experience working with virtual teams is, number one, I think virtual teams need an operating charter, a team charter. And it really needs to say, here's the ground rules for operation. And it should include expectations for team members and the team leaders. And doing that, or setting the ground rules and expectations, it helps prevent people from making negative interpretations that are not true. And the ground rules and expectations need to be specific, and they need to talk about what are the consequences when a team member is in violation of their own rules. In other words, if they're not in compliance, how are they held accountable? And that needs to be identified as well. Otherwise, it's going to end up being a conflict. Just some examples. Basic stuff. How often should messages be checked within the team's primary forum for communication? What are the timelines for project contributions? Timelines actually should go in a charter. And is there a designated leader for each project, or is there an assigned leader? What's In other words, what's the role of a leader? And what are alternative ways for contacting each other? Because sometimes the internet literally goes down, and that's going to be a conflict if someone can't be contacted. So as I said earlier, when experiencing high stress, learn your personal indicators of high stress. Yeah, that's just self-awareness. And then develop a strategy for returning to normal. I can tell you one leader that he was a union representative, and he was very effective. And so a lot of times when someone put in a call for representation, they were angry. So he knew that when he went to get them to meet, that they would be in an emotional state. So one of the things he did, he would choose a room that was, 2 or 3 minutes away from wherever the work site was, so that together they had to walk 2 to 3 minutes to this room. And what that did, that gave him a chance to help them calm down and return to a normal internal state before they started to talk about their problem. It's an excellent strategy. And not only that, if he was worked up over a problem, it did the same thing for him. It was a strategy that returned him to normal, and no one even knew what that strategy was for. There's also a strategy called the 6-second technique, and without going into a long explanation, there's 6 seconds difference between the amygdala's response and rational thinking. And so rational thinking kicks in 6 seconds after the amygdala, which is an emotional response. So if you develop a strategy where you wait at least 6 seconds before you respond, whatever you say would have been smarter than what you'd have said 6 seconds before. And it doesn't have to be complicated. Some people they ask themselves the questions. When someone pushes their emotional buttons, they have a question they ask themselves. It takes 6 seconds to answer, and then they engage. For example, I had a friend. He was a hockey fan, and he used to ask himself when someone hit his buttons. He'd ask himself. His name was Tom, and he'd say, "Tom, what 6 cities hosted the original NHL teams?" And then he would go down the list. Detroit, Chicago, New York, Boston, Toronto, Montreal. And then by the time he did that, 6 seconds passed, and then he would look at the person and engage in rational thought. And that was a pretty successful strategy. Being mindful of micro inequities is very helpful. My experience, just reminding yourself of the concept works as an intervention. And then I underline this next one 2 or 3 times. In a virtual environment, including our classroom, interpret communications with a positive intent. Read them as if whatever the message was, the intent was positive. Because 99 times out of 100, the intent was positive. And when we interpret it negatively, it's an incorrect interpretation. And then if dealing with language barriers, in other words, if you're dealing through cultural barriers and people are using English as a second language, use a template for communication, because that'll reduce the wordiness of documents. It'll make them more concise and much easier to read. Thank you.